Okay, so I'm really thrilled to have you both here to talk about dance writing and editing and how you all got there. I think a lot of dancers out there have really been kind of digging deep during the COVID pandemic and realizing kind of other passions that they have, kind of because they have to a certain extent. But that's actually incredibly healthy. As I was telling you guys before, my colleague, Dr. Brian Goonan, who's a psychologist who works with dancers, talks about the need to diversify identity as one of the most important things that a dancer can do for their mental well-being. Because if we have all of our identity tethered to one thing, especially something as fragile as we all know dance is, that can become incredibly problematic. So I'm really excited to talk to you both about your careers and your work as editors and writers, and hopefully we can give some of these dancers an idea of kind of how to get there and what to do. So my guests today are Amy Brandt, who is the editor-in-chief of Pointe magazine. Hi there. And Jennifer Stahl, who's the editor-in-chief of Dance Magazine, and both both amazing women, and friends. And I'm just thank you for being here. All right, so yeah, so let's start. I just want to hear kind of how you both got where you are, and I'll kind of share my own kind of trajectory too. But Jenny, maybe let's start with you. Like, how did you end up the editor-in-chief of Dance Magazine?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it probably all started when I went to NYU for to major in dance, and I just figured, I'm going to a really good academic school, so I should choose a good academic double major to take advantage of that, and kind of chose journalism a little bit on a whim. I didn't really understand that journalism had to do with writing, which sounds really dumb, but is the very honest truth. But then when I got into it in classes, I really just kind of loved it. And also, to be perfectly honest, I was getting a lot of really good feedback in my journalism classes and mediocre feedback in my dance classes. And so there was like a certain point where it kind of flipped in my mind of like, hey, maybe there's more opportunity in this journalism thing than in the dance world, which I've been very attached to my whole life and I love dearly, but am also terrified of not being able to find a job to support myself in. So during my last year at NYU, I got an intern with Dance Magazine, and was lucky enough that about 6 months after graduation, at first I'd been working for a pharmaceutical magazine that was just kind of a random job I found right out of school, but then Dance Magazine had something open up, and I've really been working with the company ever since, either on Dance Magazine. I worked for Pointe Magazine for a few years where I first met Amy Brandt, and now I'm back on Dance Magazine again.
Yeah, so I think that's maybe something that not everyone watching will understand, and that is that the dance media publications, Dance Magazine, Point, Dance Spirit, Dance Teacher, did I get them all?
Dance Business Weekly and the Dance Edit.
And the Dance Edit, yes. I can hardly keep up. Are all the same publishing company, right? So you all kind of work in a very kind of fluid way.
Yeah, almost everybody works on, I think every single person now works on more than one publication.
Right, right. Cool. So how about you, Amy? Let's hear how you ended up here.
Sure. So when I graduated from high school, I decided to go the dance route. So I joined Milwaukee Ballet and spent about 8 years there. But while I was one summer when I was there, I got a stress fracture, and I really had to kind of think about, my future a little bit. And I decided to enroll in school, and I'd always kind of missed school because my training background was really, I did not move away from home or go to a big elite school or anything like that. I trained in my neighborhood ballet school, which was very good. and went to like a regular high school and had like non-dance friends and things like that. So there was a part of me that kind of wanted that college experience, but I knew that I wanted to focus on dance. So anyway, I started going to school that summer at University of Wisconsin, and it took me a while. I kind of majored in English, sort of broad, I kind of knew writing was like another skill I had, but I didn't really know what to do with it. And I was in college for a very long time while I was dancing. I mean, I think over a span of like 12 years, I did not go consistently over that 12 years, but I kind of took one class at a time, maybe two over a summer. Eventually I moved to New York City. I was dancing with the Suzanne Farrell Ballet, which was a touring company. And our season was very inconsistent. So we were like on and off a lot. So at that point, I was going to Marymount Manhattan College. I was majoring in English, minoring in, I think, arts administration. Realized I wasn't really that interested in like fundraising, and kind of on a whim took a freelance article writing class just to like it was part of an elective I could take, and kind of enjoyed it a lot, and got a lot of great feedback from it. And then I just happened to see an internship open up at Dance Magazine, and I applied and did an internship at Dance Magazine. So that was sort of like working there, and through some of my college classes, I decided to switch my minor from arts administration to journalism. And I'm really glad I did, because it really gave me like a focus, and I was also reading wonderful literature and everything like that, and doing all this academic writing. But I really started to enjoy my journalism classes a lot. So through my internship at Dance Magazine, that kind of led to other writing opportunities, first at Dance Magazine, then at Pointe. And then the editor-in-chief at the time called me a few months later and said, hey, we want to start an advice column and we'd like you to write it. And so that's how I got started with the Ask Amy advice column. At the time, I really did not understand why they were asking me to write this advice column. I was a solid dancer, but I was never like a big star. Nobody really knew who I was or anything. And I was like, why would anyone want advice from me? But I'm glad I said yes, because it gave me a really consistent opportunity to work on my writing, to work on writing concisely, and to just kind of help the next generation of dancers. And I just really, really enjoyed that part the most, was just kind of serving as like a big sisterly voice for younger students. Eventually, my dance career started slowing down, or not slowing down, but it kind of like what Jenny described, like my writing career was kind of going like this, and my dance career was staying here. And so I decided to retire when I was about 36, 37. And it just kind of naturally, there was an opening at Dance Media, and that's how I moved into being an editor there, and then eventually became editor-in-chief of Pointe. So it was a very long way to explain.
No, it's awesome. I love it. It's so fun to hear. I mean, we've known each other for so long, but it's still so rare that we get to have a more kind of personal conversation. So yeah. I think it's wonderful to hear. Yeah. So it's interesting. We all started with an internship at Dance Magazine. Yeah. And Jenny was an editor. You were an editor at Pointe when I was an intern at Dance Magazine, I think. And gosh, that was 11 years ago now.
Time flies.
We haven't aged a day. But yeah, so when I stopped dancing, I was kind of trying to figure out what will make me happy. I've always been a dancer. What am I going to do? And I kept this really detailed journal when I was dancing in the school in San Francisco, and mainly because I was going through such a hard time. And really, it was like through writing in that journal, I was like, I'm thinking like, well, what makes me happy? And I was like, well, writing in my journal makes me happy, so maybe I should try a writing class. So I ended up being a writing major at the University of Pittsburgh, although my focus was in fiction. because I was a fiction major simply because I didn't want to write about dance. Like I was just not in a great place at the time, you know, with my relationship with dance. And then of course you get into fiction class and they're like, write what you know, where's your story about dancing? And I was kind of like, all right, well, if you're going to make me write about it, then I'm going to take some nonfiction too. And so I almost completed the requirements for both the nonfiction and fiction track, because I really fell in love with creative nonfiction and journalism. And so when I graduated, I was kind of like, how do I get published? I got to figure this out. I was like, you've got to be published to get published, you know, like that difficult, that difficult moment where you're like that hump. And so I took the internship at Dance Magazine and lived on my friend's couch in New York. And she was dancing with Complexions at the time. So it was actually great because she was on tour all the time. I just fed the cat. But, you know, it was really kind of like accidental that I started my internship. And as I started working with the magazines and started writing about dance, and to your point, Amy, feeling like I was maybe contributing something to help dancers, that I think is really what hooked me into being like, okay, yes, like let's write about dance, because it felt so kind of cathartic to feel like I could contribute and try and make things better or easier somehow for other dancers. So, but yeah, I did the internship and then I came back to Pittsburgh. I've continued writing with the magazines, but I had a whole career in nonprofit development at the same time. So I think that's another thing that people maybe don't understand is like, yes, I'm a contributing writer to Dance Magazine. I also have full-time jobs.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of it, you know, and I think that's something that maybe aspiring writers don't necessarily understand. It is really hard, you know, unless you're a staff editor or a staff writer somewhere, it is really hard to just do only that.
Yeah.
I remember as an intern looking at the lineups for the month and seeing how much people got paid for the first time. And I was like, oh, all these people who I thought like lived off their Dance Magazine writing, they're only getting $500 a month. And that's not enough to live on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I struggled with that too, because I was supplementing my income as a dancer, which was, you know, a dancer's income, with my writing. And it was a big learning curve because I was like, well, I'll just be a journalist when I'm done. But then I started, you know, for the arts. And then the reality is like, oh, wait, like I need to have a couple of things going at the same time. You know, it's hard to do it full time and, you know, without very extraordinary circumstances in place, you know. So that was sort of like a big realization for me, although it really helped me as I was dancing. It really helped me to supplement my income. Mm-hmm. Another thing that's weird about writing is that you write so far in advance and you get paid once the story is published, and that could be like months from now. So understanding that, okay, like this thing that all this effort I'm putting in now, I will eventually get my payment, you know, but having to navigate that payment schedule as a freelancer, mm-hmm. you know, is a learning curve. It's doable, but you have to learn how to figure it out.
Yeah, it's like once you get in the rhythm of it, if you're lucky enough to kind of get consistency, you know, you catch up to the payments and they kind of keep coming as long as you're being consistent. But yeah, it is strange, you know, you write something, then it's just kind of out in the ether, you know, as the writer, mm-hmm. just kind of out there for months, you know, and then usually I'm like, oh, this is getting published, I just got to check. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, I had to write for a lot of I mean, I was writing for all of the dance media by a certain point, even with my column, I was writing for all the dance media publications after maybe about a year or two from my internship. And so I was very busy because I was dancing full time and then like even on tour, like doing phone interviews, like on my hotel bed, like, you know, but knowing like, oh, well, this will take me through my layoff if I can make a little extra income here and things like that. So
mm-hmm. Absolutely.
A lot of puzzling.
It is hustling. It totally is.
Mm-hmm.
It's gig work. Some of my nonprofit consulting work that I do in the pandemic qualified me for some of the unemployment. And I was on the phone with a woman from unemployment the other day, and we're like going through everything, and she was just like, "You have a lot of jobs." I was like, "Yes, I do." It's like a 15-minute rundown just to explain to her
Yeah.
all these different sources of income. Well, awesome. So I love this. We'll start with you, Amy. What is your favorite thing about your job, and what is your least favorite thing about your job?
My favorite thing about my job is when we have published something that makes a difference to somebody else. When, that was my favorite part about writing, is if I could write or my advice column, just, if this can help some dancers, learn the ropes or understand how to navigate auditions a little better, or just navigate this very confusing world that can be challenging and hard. That I think is my favorite part of it. You know, or even when we can like start a conversation in the ballet worlds that, and kind of maybe instigate some change that needs to happen, or also just bringing the ballet community together. Like some stories just really get people excited about this art form that we are all obsessed with and love so much. And it's really fun to see that on social media when people are really excited about an event or something that's like, in the movies or whatnot. So, and also just I enjoy talking to dancers and teachers and directors and things like that, and just kind of knowing what's happening in the ballet world. I would say those were like my favorite things about the job.
Awesome. And what's your least favorite?
There's a lot of deadline stress. It's a lot. It's a lot. As an editor-in-chief, you have a lot to manage. So that can be stressful. And also you can't always like get back to everybody or answer everyone's questions or just like cover everything you want to cover. You just don't have the manpower, the resources or whatnot. And so, things slip through the cracks, and that bothers me sometimes.
Yeah, I know when I did my internship, I was absolutely stunned the first time I walked into the office, and I realized how few human beings are producing all of this content. And then that I feel like the number of human beings has not increased. And now you've got all this online content, and like it's so much. And so I really encourage anyone that's watching that maybe like hasn't heard back or feels bummed, like these people work so hard, you guys. Like they work so hard. So yeah, I think that's an important thing for people to understand. I marvel at it. So
it reminds me of when I was like dancing. Like I think now, like, oh, this must be what it must be like as like an artistic director when like hundreds of resumes come in. And as a dancer, you're waiting and waiting and waiting to hear back, and you don't hear back. Like that's kind of how I can compare it.
Yeah.
We're just sort of overwhelmed with like stuff, our inbox.
Absolutely. So how about you, Jenny? What's your favorite thing about your job?
Very similar to Amy. I love seeing when a story we've put out makes an actual difference. Like starting with one of your stories, Kathleen, talking about mental health, I feel like before that came out, there was like little corners and pockets of the dance world that would talk about mental health. But once your essay came out, it just became front and center in so many conversations. And seeing real change like that is just incredible to see, and so fulfilling to know that I had a piece in making that happen, and now the dance world is different for it. It's just incredibly cool, and I'll never get over that when that happens. I also just love, like, personally, what drew me to journalism as a teenager before I understood it was about writing is I love the reporting aspect of it. I love getting to talk to all these different super cool people, sometimes with very specific knowledge. Like sometimes you're talking to a dance medicine expert who like knows all about the knee and how it works, and getting that access to people, or being in the room to watch while Twyla Tharp is setting a new ballet or something. Just having that access firsthand, I always just love that. And
Yeah,
what I like
absolutely.
least,
Mhm.
it's a hard one. I would say, to be perfectly honest, is sometimes I think what I like least is, or most challenging, is when, with cover stories, we put a lot into it, both, we have the writer working on the story, and usually we have a photographer, and we set up our own shoot. And every once in a while, something slips through, either in the writing or the photography, that the dancer is, it's been a huge deal for them to be on the cover of Dance Magazine, and they're so excited and looking forward to it. And then something happens where they're disappointed. Not that we do the covers to make the dancers happy, but we're putting people on who we really respect and admire and are super buzzworthy and important in the dance world for one reason. And to know that they like really, really, really hate the way their foot is like slightly this way, it kills me. That if there's just something that, slips through, usually, always, we have all of these different eyes on our cover story. So that rarely happens, but every once in a while it does. And it's a little bit heartbreaking.
That sounds really heartbreaking. That's one that hadn't occurred to me, although I guess it makes sense. I mean, I think, especially now that I've been on the other side of, like, I've been interviewed for things now, and I've been on the other side of the coin, which has been very interesting. And it is like strange to kind of see your words floating in the context of something that's been created, or it's hard when you're trying to make people happy and amplify their voice and such, to feel that they're at all disappointed, I think. So that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm with you, and I'm with you guys. Whenever it feels like it can make a difference, it's incredible. And obviously I'll remember that article and that moment forever. It has literally changed my life. But and I was in Montreal at the time, and I remember, Jenny, you were texting me, you were like, "Are you seeing this?" Like, go on Facebook right now. But and I love the opportunity to amplify people's voices, to kind of dig into things, and to highlight experts in things that maybe don't get heard, especially in kind of the popular culture that often. So obviously, with the work I'm doing in mental health, like, I get really excited to be like, hey, look, there are people that care about your mental health that are experts in this, and they have solutions for you, and they could help, and that feels really productive. My least favorite thing is transcription.
Yes.
I loathe transcription. And I think, as with any job, it's like, you think of a writer, and a writer, and yeah, you might think about the interview, and then you think about them sitting down to the right, but then there's the hours of transcription that goes into it before the product is finished. And it's actually, I think, often takes me longer to do that than to write the actual article.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can, especially if you get a fast talker.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
And I don't know, but that is not something I thought about at all when I started.
Yeah, I didn't either. That took me a long time to just like, accept as part of the job. And for people who don't know what transcription is, it's when you interview someone, you record the interview, and then you have to go back and type it out, type out a script basically. And it takes a long time. There's a lot of pause, rewind, pause.
It takes a long time, and none of the like transcription softwares and stuff that are supposed to do it for you, like none of them do it well enough, and you can't trust it. And then especially if they're using ballet terminology, it's like, forget about it. Like, who knows what's going to come out? And you just end up spending more time cleaning it than you would have just typing it yourself. And it's like, I hate it, but at the same time, it is such an important part of my process. Like, I often find, like, while I'm transcribing, that the pieces of the article start to like make more sense to me because I catch consistencies or kind of, that's where my subheads come from, right? Is like when I'm transcribing, I start figuring out where they go. But yeah, that sucks. Okay, so I'm actually really excited to hear your answers to this one. Jenny, do you want to go first? So what makes someone a quote good dance writer, and what qualities and experience should they have?
Good question. You know what? I think it really depends. Like, in terms of what we look for, we use all kinds of writers. There are some writers that we go to who are great profile writers. They're excellent at capturing someone's story and telling that. There are other writers who are great service writers, like how-to type stories, giving information that dancers can use. And with some of those, I don't necessarily always use someone who is super knowledgeable about dance. If they're writing a nutrition story, we'll have to know the basics of dance, but more so I want them to be really, what's the word? Adept at using, like being able to speak with a dietitian and knowing the right questions to ask and how to phrase things in an appropriate way. Whereas if I want someone to write a smart think piece about the dance world, they need to know that part of the dance world they're talking about backwards and forwards. They should have been either very embedded in it themselves as a dancer or artistic staff person, or just be very knowledgeable about the field. So a lot of it comes down to a person's background and experience, and what kind of story we're looking to have them write. And I think in general, if they're describing a performance or a dancer, they really need to know how to describe movement well. It's a very tricky and unique thing. And I still honestly I'm challenged by it sometimes, trying to capture what it is about this dancer's movement that is special and exciting without resorting to cliches, because there are so many cliches when talking about dance.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like some of the hardest things I've written are like the 75 words for the 25 to watch, or stars of the core or whatever. Those are hard to write because you have so few words, and you're trying to like capture that je ne sais quoi, right? Like without saying je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, exactly. And translate a mostly nonverbal art form into only words.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. What about you, Amy? What makes someone a good dance writer? What kind of qualities are you looking for?
Say everything that Jenny said. But also and not even so much a dance writer, but I guess just a magazine writer. You have to be able to organize your thoughts. You need to get to the heart of the subject that you're writing about. You really need to understand it. like, and if you don't totally understand it, you need to really research it and talk to the right people and reference them. So, but you need to get to the heart of your subject. You need to be able to kind of cut away all the like sidetrack. You have to stay really kind of focused on what you're talking about, because it's very easy when you're starting out to like, well, I want to discuss, then there's this whole aspect of auditioning, and then that's like 3 pages later, so you have to stay really kind of focused on your angle, and you'll need to be able to organize your thoughts in a way on paper or digitally, in a way that really makes the story clear and accessible, so that the average person can read it, average dancer can read it and understand it, or if they don't totally understand it, like that it's at not like a level that's incomprehensible. It makes them want to maybe look into it a little further or whatnot. But really just being able to like organize the story in such a way, in like a journalistic structure that makes sense. We get some writers are very great academic writers, and that can fall flat in a magazine article and make someone just turn the page, because it gets very lofty or whatnot, where it might be more appropriate for like an academic journal or a book, or something like that. So and also you need to be open to, just like as a dancer, you need to be open to feedback, because that's what the editor is there for, is to, because the editor sees sort of a bigger picture of how does this fit in with the content we produce, as a whole. And so you need to kind of be open to taking that feedback and working with it, and being open to making adjustments and things like that, and understanding that things will probably change from the first draft compared to what will end up on page or screen. And then last thing I would say is, even though you want to be like kind of clear and accessible and understandable in the story, I always really appreciate someone who also just understands the beauty of words and how to use language in a way that's creative or can really illuminate something through metaphor or whatnot, in a way that's still, accurate and factual. But yeah, so, being able to stay organized and focused, but also having the talent to kind of bring out some beauty in the words that you use. That to me is makes an excellent writer.
Absolutely.
So.
You make such a good point about like the difference between magazine writing and like academic writing. And I think sometimes it's like there's maybe a misconception that an expert should be writing about a topic. So like if it's an article on dancers' knees, then someone who's an expert in dancers' knees should be writing it. But it's like that's not journal. The journalist is the one who can bring that kind of novice perspective to it, to ask the right questions, to explain it in a way that everyone can understand. And I just think that's maybe another misconception. Like sometimes when I talk with professionals, like not dancers, but even dance medicine professionals, and I'd love to write about, could you connect me with Dance Magazine so I can write about the posterior blah 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 blah. And I'm just like, no. Like maybe someone can interview you about it,
Yeah.
just because it's so different.
Yeah, magazine writer is there to translate that knowledge to the general public, or in our case, the dance public.
Yeah. So that's why I think one of the a great quality in someone who wants to be a dance writer is like this kind of constant curiosity, like, the not making a ton of money and the having the multiple jobs and all of that. Like what fills me from writing is the impact, but also that I'm just a very curious person, and I get really excited to talk to an expert in their field and kind of pick their brains and hear. I often tell people who think they want to become writers if they enjoy their homework. Because I'm like, being a writer is basically having homework for the rest of your life.
Kind of, yeah.
It's
Feel
true.
the
Because you
way
have to do that homework both before your interview to prepare for it, to know the right questions to ask once you get that expert on the phone, and then afterwards to follow up on the things that they have said and research further.
Yeah, it's like, and I loved homework. I'm a nerd, you know. So, I mean, I didn't always love doing it instead of like hanging out, but I didn't like mind my homework. I don't know, as long as it wasn't a subject I liked. So I think that's a big one too. But something, it sounds like, and from what I'm aware, that it's not as if every person that's writing for you ladies is like has a degree in writing, right?
No, some have backgrounds in maybe more like communications or something. I mean, I don't know. Writing can be, it can be learned. It can also be a very natural talent. So I have one person, a dancer I'm working with right now, who just kind of has a natural knack for writing, for like that magazine style writing. And I've been working with her for a couple of months, and it's been really fun to kind of show her, you know, but she just has like a natural understanding of it. Whereas others have, you know, really gone to school and have worked on their school paper and understand all the ins and outs. So
Yeah, I
Definitely.
feel like people come from a variety of different backgrounds, and some of that is reflected in what we have them write. Like a dancer who who doesn't have an experience reporting, we're more likely to have them write a personal essay about their own experience, which it just makes more sense since they don't, you know, necessarily have experience yet setting up those interviews, doing the transcriptions, which is its own different thing.
Yeah, definitely. So then I'm also interested in what the good qualities for an editor are and how those might be a little bit different. Because I can tell you, like, I am not an editor. I don't say this publicly often enough, but like I adore my editors. I absolutely love you guys. I don't, the other thing people don't understand is I'm terrible at titles. I don't think I've titled a single article I've ever written. Like, I'm like, these are not my skills. These are my editor skills. So tell me a little bit about, maybe Jenny, if you want to go first, tell me a little bit about like, what's a little bit different about being an editor and what skills are needed for that.
Yeah, I think an editor has to come with a range of skills, and you know, from, you know, an editor sees the overall arc of either an issue or just on the website from one week to the next, and has to think about the balance of all of that. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that our stories, a lot of our story ideas come from the editors themselves, and then they're assigning them out to writers. And then other story ideas are being pitched by the writers. And then the editor works with them to kind of shape that idea and make it make sense for that brand. But then once the editor is working with a writer, one thing that I'm always surprised by working with our team is how every single editor has a different style and picks up on different things and responds to different parts of the story. One thing that I found is there's this balance between, for an editor to see the overall picture of the story, you have to read through it, take a step back, ask, what is this story telling? Is it doing it in the most powerful way? Is the language compelling? But then you also get very like minuscule, like picking out every word, like, is this the right word that you're trying to use here? And then there's also the skill of working with the writer that you have and figuring out how you're going to get the best out of that particular person. A lot of writers, or not every writer, but different writers respond to edits in different ways. And so if you have a writer who you know is going to take things very personally, which dancers sometimes do, you just want to be careful to phrase your requests in a way that's not going to make them shut down and be like, oh my God, I did everything wrong. But make sure that, you know, you're pointing out the great parts of it and pointing out how it could possibly be stronger if they did X, Y, Z, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a mix of different skills. Amy, what am I missing?
That's pretty thorough. One thing that's kind of hard, like when as an editor, you like say for instance, I kind of look at a month or two. Right now, I'm looking at a 2-month period, and you want to have a balance of stories. So you want to have your Q&As, you want to have your glamorous profile, you want to have your training stories, you want to have your career stories, you want to have your like kind of fun stuff, serious features that cover issues, etc. And you want to have a balance of that because there are different kind of readers too. Different people enjoy different types of stories. So you kind of have to be mindful of making sure you're providing enough of a good diet of stories that covers all the vegetables and fruits and all that stuff. But and that's kind of hard sometimes, because it's easy to get a little too much dessert maybe, and not enough too much fluff and not enough serious, or too much serious, not enough fluff, or whatever. And I shouldn't say fluff, but fun stuff, glamour, people, the dance bag. Everyone at first Pointe's dance bag, what's in my dance bag, since the first issue has been one of the number one favorite. Every time we do a survey, I love the dance bag. So, great. People like that stuff, but they also want that more serious coverage too. So you have to be really mindful about okay, am I hitting enough of these subjects in this amount of time? It's a lot of planning in advance, photo shoots and things like that. Anticipating, even with stories, so if the editorial team thinks of a story and they want to assign it to a writer, you have to present it in a way to the writer that gives them enough direction. So you need to first think, how does a story need to be told? Is it best told through just a Q&A interview? Is it more nuanced? Do we want to bring in several voices? And who are those people that you want to talk to? Let's have a teacher, and maybe we want to have a mental health specialist, and maybe a dancer, so you have a range of experiences and perspectives. Or maybe it's a photo essay. Maybe it's just beautiful photos that tell the story. So you need to figure that out first, and then you need to think, okay, well, who in our team of writers would be, the best to write this story? Who would be, a good fit? And then you need to reach out to the writer and kind of explain what you're looking for. So you really have to communicate with them well, so that it creates less work in the end. Because if you communicate what you want from the writer and they know what you want and they go out and get it, and otherwise they may send you a draft that's oh no, this is not how I wanted this story to go. So you have to be able to communicate well with your writing team, which I often fail at. So sorry, writers.
I don't think that's true. No, I think, I think something that's really important for all writers, especially young writers, and one of you touched on this earlier, but is not to take your edits personally, to try really hard to understand that, this is a piece of a larger picture. You can't see the whole picture, right? I also think that if you, and I have no idea, I may be a pain in the butt with edits, but I try very hard to just kind of be all right, well, this is, I'm being paid to write the article they want, so I'm going to write the article they want. And but then, you know, I think when you are kind of easygoing about stuff like that and kind of trust the process and trust, and it's also easier for me because I've been writing with you all for so long that I trust my editors. You know, it's pretty rare that I'm with a brand new editor. But if you can trust the process, then when something comes up that is really important to you and you're like, look, I'm digging my heels in on this, you're a lot more likely to get it. You know, and like you don't want to waste that opportunity, you know, because when it really does matter to you, you don't want to be the one that's already asked for a million things. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important too as an editor, the skill of knowing that, you know, you entrusted your writer to do this research and find out what's important about the story. And there is a, you know, there's a back and forth of, you know, here's what we need as Dance Magazine, but the writer knows, okay, but here's the nugget of the story that really needs to be told. And even though you're asking me to do X, how can I make sure that this still gets told? So there definitely has to be a collaboration there.
Yeah, and it's also important as an editor to know that like you don't have all the answers when you assign the story. The writer is the one going out there and gathering the research and the information. So if the answers will say come back and it's not what you expect, like, you know, it's like, okay, well, I need to go with this then because this is what I guess is, you know, the reality. It's not my own idea of what something is. So
Yeah, I had a professor in school give us this quote, and I wish I need to figure out who to attribute to because I use it all the time, and it's totally unfair that I'm not crediting them. But there's the journalist in me. But the quote was, some people write because they think they have something to tell the world, and others write because they think the world has something to tell them. And I feel like I'm very much the latter in the way I approach my writing. And there have definitely been times where I've had to send one of you an article and been like, okay, so after I talked to all these people, this is actually the story. Like what you assigned me wasn't the story, and I hope you're going to be cool with this because this is the story, you know?
yeah.
And that's hard. I mean, and I've done it a couple times, and each time I'm kind of holding my breath. I'm like, I have to rewrite this whole thing, you know? But it's true, you know, you're learning as you're reporting. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so this one, oh my goodness, advice on pitches. I get asked this question all the time. So Amy, why don't you go first? So what is your advice to someone who's pitching Pointe, and
Okay.
what is a good pitch? What's going to get your attention?
Okay, very first and foremost, know exactly who you are pitching to. Know the publication. You know, Pointe, we exclusively cover ballet. And so don't, you know, pitch me a story about a postmodern company or a postmodern dancer or whatnot. I will most likely like not pay attention to it unless there's some sort of ballet angle to it. So that's the biggest thing. So know the magazine, know who the magazine's audience is, like who's reading the magazine. And that's step, I would say, very important. Also, just I think I mentioned it before, just have like a really focused idea and angle, and make sure that it's like something a little new, not a story you've already seen written a couple of times, because chances are we've covered it already. And that, you know, so unless it kind of takes a new angle or brings out, maybe goes a little deeper into something that was touched on in this story, but not really delved into. Maybe we can go a little deeper and spend this article talking about this little nugget, you know, that's helpful. So keep your angle very specific and narrow, be open to changing it if we say, oh, we already covered this. What about XYZ? Bless you, Jenny. And then also, have a few ideas about who you want to talk to. You know, if you want to interview some folks, maybe have a few ideas and make sure they're not all your friends, because then we get into this kind of weird conflict of interest gray area, which is very common in the dance world because it is so tiny, especially in the ballet world. It's very hard not to interview people you haven't hung out with once or danced with at, you know, a summer program 10 years ago, or someone, a director you worked for. But if that's like your main pool of who you want to talk to, that becomes like kind of problematic. So, you know, have a few ideas for people you want to talk to, make sure they're not all your friends. So that would be some good advice that I would give to young aspiring writers.
Awesome. How about you, Jenny?
Everything Amy said. And a couple other things. I think in terms of, knowing who you're pitching, making sure we haven't covered it before. You can do a quick search on our site and see if your idea has already been written by us. But also, even if you can pitch to a specific section that we do, that is always really helpful. And usually those are the most successful pitches. For instance, Dance Magazine has a column in the print issue that we also run online. It's called The Creative Process. And it's speaking to someone who has like an interesting use of dance in their career usually. And it's a profile of a single person, short intro and little bits of quotes from them. And whenever I think I've said yes to all the pitches I've gotten because it's so specific. And if someone feels like a good fit for that specific column, then I'll say yes. Whereas if you just say, hey, here's this person doing this cool thing, maybe I'll think like, oh, creative process. Yes, they'd be a fit there. But you're more likely to get a yes if you have already connected those dots. I'd also say just in writing your pitch letter, make sure your subject line of your email is super clear. Pitch, here's your idea. So I know right away what I'm reading and responding to. Put your idea right up front. Include any links to your writing that you've done that I could read and get a sense of what your writing is like. It's okay if it's even like a blog post or something. It doesn't have to necessarily be in a professional publication. I just want to get a sense of what you're like as a writer so I know what to expect if I've never worked with you before. And then if you don't hear back from us, check back again in a couple weeks. Sometimes I miss something. But then if you don't hear back after that second check-in, I apologize, but I probably just didn't have a chance to tell you that it wasn't a right fit. I usually try to tell people when it's not, but sometimes things fall through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems to like trying to be brief, right? Like, I don't know that you guys want to read a whole article about the article that they want to write, you know?
Yeah. And also don't just write the article and then send it to us. We always like to shape things for our purposes. So if you have the idea, wait to pitch it first, rather than going to all the effort of writing it and then finding out it's not a right fit for us.
Yeah, I concur. And also concur about the writing samples. If you've never, written for us before, I would just let us, show us a couple of school papers if you're young, or newspaper articles, or whatever you have is helpful. And another just practical piece of advice, this is just like a proofreading thing. If you're going to be pitching multiple magazines, just be careful. Just say like, dear Ms. Brandt, blah, 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 blah. I would love to pitch this story for Dance Magazine. Well, I'm not the editor of Dance Magazine. So now I know that you're also pitching Dance Magazine. Like, just kind of be savvy a little bit about, check your email before you send it, because we get a lot of those, which is understandable because there's so many magazines in the company that you want to kind of like cast your net, see what, gets caught. But just, because we do notice that.
Yeah, we get that a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't want to hire a writer that's not paying attention to detail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also like to one of your earlier points, like I would actually argue that if you're pitching the same article or the same idea to all of the dance media publications, you probably haven't done that research that's needed to understand who you're pitching to.
Yes.
I think Dance Magazine and Pointe, maybe like Dance Magazine might have some more overlap with the others, but to me, the same article for Pointe, the same pitch for Pointe and Dance Spirit doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like it would be really rare that that would happen. So
Yeah.
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 And also just another practical thing, if you don't know who to pitch on the magazine, I would send it to either just the editor-in-chief, or you could copy all the editors, but don't send the same pitch to each editor individually, because that just confuses everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. That's at least make them all aware that this is everyone who's seeing it. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So what do you want someone who wants to be a writer or an editor? What do you want them to know? Like, what do you wish that they knew? And maybe that's something you experience, like
This is sort of for dancers, I'll just say, because a lot of dancers, they know a lot about dance, and that's of course, but they'll write in and they are like, oh, I dance and I love writing, and now I want to write an article. But like, you do kind of have to have some education in how, even very, very few people understand exactly what we are looking for right off the bat. So being a beautiful dancer doesn't always translate to being able to write a magazine article. There are skills you need to learn, and it would benefit you if you're interested in learning more about writing for journalism versus writing, writing for school or whatnot, is to take a journalism 101 class, or just like an article writing class, and see if you like it, and see what the difference is between, writing an article and writing an academic paper. It's just helpful. And then, because we don't have time really to teach people what we need. I mean, we can, and we have, but we're so small staffed that we really need people who kind of get it right away. So this is not to discourage dancers at all. But it would be smart to just kind of like look at how we structure articles, and like, what they look like, how they flow, how they begin and end, and think about that, and think about what makes that different than, a paper you might write for college. That would be one piece of advice.
Absolutely. How about you, Jenny? What do you wish they knew?
I would just say that in terms of thinking about this as a career, just knowing the practicalities of it, I feel very fortunate to count myself among a very, very small number of people who get to do this for a living and make it my full-time job. I think a lot of dancers think of, dance writing as a backup, but it's not the most reliable backup. There are very few full-time jobs available out there. And as was kind of mentioned before, even if you're thinking of doing it as a freelance writer, that takes both a lot of hustle, and you'll likely be needing to have another job along with it. So just knowing that if you want to go for this career, that's amazing, but you have to really know that there are limitations, and you might need to be doing something else along with it to make it part of your profession.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think just like dance, and just like anything worth doing, it's hard to be good at it. I mean, it takes, writers have skills the same way dancers do, it is an art form too. And, so I think, and I'm speaking for myself here, when I was a dancer, I think I always kind of felt that nothing could ever be as hard as dance. Like this is the hardest, most loftiest pursuit, and then, life happened and I was like, oh wait, doing anything well is really, really hard. So I think that's important. Like to Amy's point, like being a great dancer doesn't mean you're going to be a great writer, and that's okay. Like there might be something else. So I think that is important to remember, is that, yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it,
Mhm.
Yeah, and there's a learning curve. Well, there you start here, and then the more you do it, the more you learn, and then you become fluent. So
Absolutely. Well, and that also, I would come back to like trusting your editors, like also don't, pigeonhole yourself into like, I'm going to be a dance writer. Like you could probably write about a lot of different things,
Yeah.
so to kind of be open to that, and then trust your editors, because I mean, yeah, I went to school for writing, but I went to school for fiction. And I did take nonfiction classes, but I feel like I learned how to be a magazine writer from you all. I mean, seriously, from Wendy Perrin, and from, like all these wonderful editors who have taken time and invested in me, and saw something in me and kept giving me work to do, so I think that's another reason to trust the editors. I might as well have a t-shirt. I'm like, just trust your editor. Um, but is there any final words of advice or anything you think that anyone out there should know before we wrap it up?
I would say just also, if you're interested in being a writer, read as much as possible, not just dance content. Read all, if you want to write for magazines, read all kinds of magazines, websites, because you'll get a feel for how stories are put together and different ways to use language. Find your favorite writers and copy them. Not plagiarize, obviously, but figure out what it is that makes them so good, and try to incorporate that into your own work.
That is such good advice. There are a lot of people out there, I think, that like writing but don't like reading, and you have to read. Like you have to. And I mean, I love reading magazines. Like it's my favorite form of, I don't know, I just love it. I love the visual aspect of it. I love the way the pages feel. I love the way they smell. Like I just really love magazines. So it makes sense that I would end up writing in magazines. But I read books as well. And to your point on like copying them, sometimes I'll even take like the structure of a story and like practice writing within that structure. So there's that really famous Gay Talese article, Frank Sinatra Has a Cold,
Yeah.
where he never got to interview Frank Sinatra. And I think it was written for Esquire.
I think you're right.
Yeah. But it's a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous article. And he never even gets to interview the person he's profiling. And so I remember in school, one of our assignments was to practice writing a profile without an interview, just to try doing that, because it sharpens that skill of like description and all of that. So I totally agree with that. Yeah.
another thing I would say, especially for dancers who are used to dancing, is that you really need to get comfortable talking to people and taking some initiative, asking someone a question and then kind of saying like, oh, wait, go back, like explain why that is, like you have to learn how to talk to people and ask questions, and like you said before, curiosity. So that's something I know for myself was very scary when I was starting out, especially when I would have to call a director I had like auditioned for 3 years prior, and gotten rejected. And I have to like call and ask him about his upcoming performances. You know, it can be kind of intimidating sometimes to reach out to someone, or just, so that's something you could practice too, just with friends, or just with, you know, someone that interests you, that you're working with or in school with or dancing with. You know, that school kind of, like when I was in college, that kind of, you know, provided a safe way to reach out and write these like articles that weren't going to be published, but they were for my class. But, you know, it helped me get comfortable with just making, you know, picking up the phone or sending that email out, or reaching out to someone and just seeing if they'd be interested in talking. And then, you know, making them comfortable so that they don't feel like this. It's something that dancers, I mean, dancers enjoy talking. It's not like dancers don't talk, but it's one thing that you have to learn how to get comfortable with. So
absolutely.
And along with that, oh, sorry, I was just going to add on to that, being comfortable with sounding stupid sometimes. Sometimes you have to ask questions in an interview that like show that you don't know something, or it took me a while to learn that like it's okay to not know, because you have to ask as the reader who's getting information from this expert source, and it's okay if the person says that's a stupid question, because they still might answer it.
You have to ask you have to ask the obvious questions, like partially to inform yourself. And sometimes when you ask the obvious question, has this ever happened to you guys, and the answer isn't as obvious as you thought it was, and you're like, oh man, I'm glad I asked that question.
yeah,
all the time.
All the time.
And some people don't want to answer the question, and then you're kind of like, oh, okay,
yeah.
Well, that question led into my next question, which led into my next question. So now I need to like punt and figure out how to like get anything out of this interview. So
it really is like we could do a whole separate thing just on interviews, I think, because it is like its own art form, and it is really scary at first because dancers aren't really trained to vocalize and appear, I don't want to say vulnerable, but there is a certain amount of vulnerability when you're interviewing someone on both sides of that interview. But yeah, no, I'll sometimes say like, all right, I'm going to ask the obvious question, but sometimes it's just because I need their quote saying it. Because when you're putting it together, you're using description and reporting and quotes. And I like to have availability of all of them, for when you're putting the article together. So that's such a good point. Such a good point.
And another thing that's interesting too is that a lot of, particularly like younger people that you interview, they're very concerned about how they come across, and so sometimes they can give you very like perfect packaged answers that don't really reflect their personality or something, and then that kind of comes like across very flat in a story because they seem kind of robotic because they're trying to say the perfect thing, and that often happens in like email interviews and things like that. And so that's something you have to like keep in mind too.
Absolutely. The younger the dancer, like when I have to interview a very young dancer, I get really, really nervous because I'm just like, are they going to give me, I've had to write whole articles where I couldn't actually use a quote from someone because it was just too mechanical, and it wasn't gonna work. So it's a good point. All right. Well, anything else?
I don't think so.
I will say, like, I think it's great. It has been really cool to have all these dancers reaching out about dance writing and such, and just writing in general. It's been such an important part of my life and such a kind of cathartic and yet productive thing in my life. But I think, like dance, it has to be something you're doing because you love it, because no one here is making $1 million.
Right.
And it's worthwhile as long as it's worthwhile, right?
Right. And also today, we're mainly talking today about journalism. I mean, there are creative, other avenues you can take your dance knowledge with your writing curiosity. If this sounds like too cut and dry and like you're not expressive enough and you really want to write a book, or you want to write an autobiography or something that really goes in depth where you have hundreds of pages, and that's you can do that. There's just, that's another, those are other experts.
Or poetry or academic writing. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, I tell people often, especially after I've interviewed them, and because sometimes you can tell, like, when somebody's, I don't know, sometimes I can just tell I'm going to disappoint somebody. Like, they're going to want so much more in there than it's going to be in there. But articles, magazine articles, newspaper articles, they're like glaciers. Like, there's the 10% at the top, that isn't there, and then there's everything else we talked about.
Yeah.
And I think that's that was hard for me at first, to get used to. And there are definitely times where things get published and you're like, man, I really liked all that stuff, but it's, it is what it is. Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathleen.
And thanks to anybody who watched. We'll wave.